Yoimiya is a 5-star archer and a powerhouse of a pyro unit. She can be a bit fragile, but this glass cannon can shred through enemies quickly. A friendly reminder to make sure you keep your flammables in safe storage. Yoimiya has a lot of firepower and she turns up the heat the longer you can put pressure on the enemy. Just make sure to respect the damage phase or shield up during those crucial moments or you'll crash and burn. So let's have a look at this cheeky trickster we call the Queen of the Summer Festival. Yoimiya's basic attack Firework Flare-Up features a 5-hit combo with 2 multi-hit strings woven in for a grand total of 7 hits. Initially, these basic attacks are only capable of dealing physical damage, but this can be changed later, as we'll soon see. Like mini archers, when holding down the attack button or simply swapping to aim mode, Yoimiya will focus pyro energy into her arrowhead. Wait long enough and 3 additional charges will light up, circle around, and follow your loosened arrow. Against groups of enemies, these additional charges are capable of hitting enemies outside your principal target. Upon activating Yoimiya's skill, Miwabi Fire Dance, Yoimiya uses the power of her vision and some sparklers to add pyro infusion to her basic normal attack combo. While in this state, the additional charges that Yoimiya would normally gain while in aim mode will not be available. While performing basic attack combo strings during her pyro infusion, Yoimiya's first ascension passive, Tricks of the Troublemaker, will increase her pyro damage bonus by 2% with each hit and can stack up to 10 times. When you're done dealing damage using Yoimiya's infused combo string and your energy reserves are at maximum, you can unleash her burst, Ryukin Saxifrage, which deals a small AoE of pyro damage and marks the primary target of the blast with an Oros Blaze. This mark deals extra damage when an ally or teammate scores hits on the marked target. In addition, activating Yoimiya's burst triggers her second passive, Summer Night's Dawn, which grants her allies an initial 10% attack bonus that can increase by an additional % for each stack given by her first passive. So Yoimiya's talents imply that during the damage phase of a fight, she's meant to deal damage and increase pressure on the enemy, then pass the baton of damage dealing to her allies with an almost 4-piece Noblesse Oblige-like effect built right in. At that point, it's all about capitalizing on that attack buff and setting her up for the next damage rotation. Now, if your team primarily consists of off-field damage dealers, there's a slight modification to the order of operations here. But just bear in mind that Yoimiya's burst can only deal additional instances of damage when your allies score hits on the marked target. Now, of course, depending on how you build Yoimiya, you might not really see her burst all that much. Some builds don't use her burst, while others do. What you decide with your build will ultimately change how critical it is that you level it. I wouldn't ignore it, but I wouldn't stress over getting it any higher than what you feel comfortable sparing the materials for. That said, Yoimiya's basic attacks are going to be the bulk of her damage, and you'll likely need to prioritize her normal attacks above all else. Her elemental skill modifiers multiply against her basic talent, making them almost equally important to improve. However, the scaling of her basic attack carries a bit more weight in the long run of things, so when in doubt, prioritize normal attack first. Yoimiya's performance is pretty good without Constellations, but if you really like her and have disposable income, her Constellations really emphasize making her stronger. One way or another, it seems almost all of Yoimiya's Constellations are for her own benefit. Her default talents make her a bit of a team player, but her Constellations treat her like an all-star. Her first constellation, Agate Ryukin, extends the duration of her burst and grants her an attack buff when her allies manage to defeat her marked target, which means she can go into her next damage run even stronger than before. And while her allies are at it, her fourth constellation, Pyrotechnic Professional, will shorten the cooldown of her skills so she can get back on the field faster. In single player, I feel like team lineups focus almost entirely on setting up for the next damage run, but I doubt it's done so quickly that this constellation is necessitated. I think it has more practical uses in multiplayer. Further down the line, Yoimiya's 6th constellation has a 50% chance to add an additional instance of pyro damage alongside her normal attack combo string, which means on average you can expect an extra source of normal attack damage every other attack. And since at this point I think it's pretty obvious you want to give your Yoimiya a crit build, let's circle back to her 2nd constellation, which I think is perhaps her most valuable. Her 6th constellation is nice and all, but most players aren't going to see it. A procession of bonfires, however, might be a more reasonable target to aim for. It grants Yoimiya a 25% pyro damage bonus for 6 seconds whenever she scores a critical hit, with each additional hit refreshing the timer of the bonus. If you go for any constellations, that would be the one to have. Talk about turning up the heat. So at this point, I'm pretty sure we know that Yoimiya's intended build is going to be focusing on her firepower. We know for absolute certain that we're going to be wanting an attack % sands, a pyro damage goblet, and a crit circlet. Regardless of which set we choose, this will be the artifact layout as far as pieces are concerned. But as for which set bonus to aim for, it may come down to which weapon you have available to you and your preferred playstyle. For newer adventurers, this combination sets the stage for what future builds may look like. We're going to start off with 4 pieces of the martial arts set and the slingshot. The slingshot is a 3-star crit rate weapon that grants bonus damage when attacking enemies that are relatively close to you, and the martial artist set grants 15% damage bonus to your normal and charged attack, with the 4-piece bonus granting an additional 25% bonus after activating an elemental skill. This set fits perfectly to Yoimiya's playstyle. And if you don't have the slingshot and you prefer using reaction teams, the Raven Bow will work just as well. As you graduate world levels, your builds might need to be a little tougher though. For mono pyro or non-reactive teams, 4-piece Lava Walker provides a 35% bonus to any enemies affected by pyro. That means regardless of whether Yoimiya is infused or not, if there's fire, there is a bonus. If you want more consistent damage that doesn't depend on which elemental aura is on your foe, you can always opt for the 2-piece Crimson Witch for a 15% pyro damage boost, and any set that grants 18% attack. This mix set is less conditional, but it's generally weaker than the other candidates. Next up, we have our 2 glass cannon sets, the Shimenawa's Reminiscence and the Echoes of an Offering set. Shimenawa is fairly straightforward. You spend 15 energy and gain 50% damage bonus. This set is really great if you have a ton of energy recharge substats and a lot of high attack, but lack a weapon that grants any bonus damage. The obvious weakness of this set is it's fairly difficult to use your burst consistently, and it might even discourage you from using it at all. The Echo set does not have this downside, but it also isn't quite as straightforward either. Instead of a normal damage bonus, it grants you a flat talent buff equal to a hefty portion of your maximum attack. The buff is triggered randomly as you perform attacks, with each attack that doesn't get bonus damage improving the odds of the next attack, resetting each time the buff is triggered. It is RNG dependent, but it can rake in some impressive numbers. It also frees up your burst. And while a bow with bonus damage won't go amiss, this set also works pretty well if all you have is a bow that raises your attack. Now, if you're not a fan of not using your burst and hate the idea of an RNG dependent set, you could always opt to find a nice bow that grants a lot of bonus damage and just combine 2 pieces of both sets for a grand total of 36% attack. Or, if you prefer a decent 4-piece bonus that grants decent damage, promotes safety, and is thematically appropriate, you could always opt for the Retracing Bowlight set. The 2-piece increases shield strength and the 4-piece improves normal and charged attack damage by 40% whenever the wearer is shielded. While the damage is conditional, the condition is something you might be meeting anyway. You see, Yoimiya, for all her strength, has one very frustrating weakness: her tendency to get interrupted. I think MiHoYo was afraid that she'd be too powerful otherwise, but they made her very easy to interrupt. Even the slightest hit while she's delivering a combo will force her to reset entirely, and that can be pretty annoying. As I said before, respect the damage phase. Yoimiya seems intentionally designed to reward players for playing according to boss attack patterns while punishing them for being too greedy. However, a fairly solid shield sidesteps this issue altogether. Either that, or it's yet another reward for carrying a shield unit in your team. I can't say for certain, I didn't design the game. If I did, I'd give her what they gave Ito and let her continue her combo where she left off after dodging. At any rate, it's pretty handy to give her a shield. We have plenty to choose from, and I'll cover them in a moment, but let's go over some weapon choices first. From the slingshot, we could directly upgrade it with any other bow that gives crit rate. There's the Battle Pass Viridescent Hunt. It doesn't color coordinate very well, but it gets the job done. The Blackcliff Warbow is also an interesting choice for improving crit damage, as well as bolstering Yoimiya's attack while defeating hordes of enemies. Doesn't work so great against bosses though. If you were here during the Windbloom Festival, you might have the Windbloom Ode. I know it's an odd choice and probably not too ideal, but I figured most people have it and have no idea who to give it to, so this could be at the very least an interesting suggestion. So the idea is to run Yoimiya in a reaction-based team so she benefits from the elemental mastery substat on the weapon. In addition to that, the passive grants an attack buff after using an elemental skill. So to offset the fact the bow doesn't grant bonus damage, you could either use the Bolide or the Echo set. Like I said, it's just an idea, but I think there's a surprising amount of merit to it. Next up is the Hamayumi, which you may have noticed is the weapon you see on her splash art. It's not exactly a bad choice, but if you use it, you will never see her burst, because the only way to get the really good bonus damage it promises in its passive is to keep your energy locked at 100%. That full refinement 64% bonus damage is nothing to sneeze at, however your luck with billets might not be all too great. But if you've been no stranger to pulling on the banner, maybe you might have come across the Rust. The Rust is an amazing bow on Yoimiya. If the Thundering Pulse wasn't essentially a direct upgrade, I'd find it hard to recommend even a lot of the 5-star weapons over it. At full refinement, its passive grants an 80% damage bonus at the cost of reduced charged attacks, but since Yoimiya doesn't really use them, it's not exactly a problem. As a plus, this weapon really said why not both, and gives a decent attack percent secondary stat. Honestly, since I already mentioned it, I feel the rust is only really beat out by the Thundering Pulse, which feels like a direct upgrade. A lot of the buffs have time conditions, but honestly it just favors playing Yoimiya like you normally would. The only hurdle you might come across is ensuring that your energy reserves don't hit 100% until after your infusion ends. So if you really feel dead set on Shimenawa, this weapon synergizes with it quite well. I won't be covering the other 5 stars, but if you want to use them, feel free to. I just mentioned the ones I feel carry the most weight that wouldn't be better used by other characters. So on to teams, or rather characters that make for good teammates. I won't be telling you which specific lineup to use, instead I'll outline the specific components you'll need and which characters can fit that role. Firstly, Yoimiya really enjoys any character that can provide a shield. Zhongli is an obvious choice, but not everyone has them, so if you don't have them or you don't want to use them, you have access to Noelle, Diona, Beidou, Toma, sometimes Xinyan, and surprisingly, Yanfei. So since there's quite a few of them, I'll just list them in an infograph with some notable information about each of their shields. You can pause the video or check out the link to an image I place in the description. For further party recommendations, Yoimiya also really likes teams with characters that deal off-field damage. That could be Fischl, Yae, Xingqiu, Kokomi, Albedo, Beidou, again, and even the Raiden Shogun. Essentially, pair her with anyone who can help her overcome her lack of crowd control, or any character that can boost her damage with coordinated reaction damage when she's fighting bosses. And definitely don't be afraid to bring various different elements to react with. Yoimiya doesn't mind overloaded the same way other Pyro DPS do because her attacks are ranged, so electro characters are welcome on her team. Finally, we've reached our last consideration: buffers. That's right, Bennett and Yunjin. I'll be honest, Bennett is talked about to death because he applies to most every character. However, Yunjin specifically applies to damage bonus to normal attackers, and normal attackers are not so common. So if you put Yunjin on your team, she provides a flat basic attack talent buff when you perform a normal attack. The buff scales off her defense, and her defense improves the more variety of elements are on your team, so she really rewards you for using diverse reaction teams. In summary, Yoimiya is pretty powerful in her own right. She has her own shortcomings, but if you work on overcoming them, her power really goes a long way. At any rate, that will do it for this overview of Yoimiya. I hope you learned something new, and if you didn't, I hope you enjoyed anyway. I tried to be somewhat thorough, but I also wanted to highlight that you're free to make your own choices, so I focused more on making you aware of what your options are and leaving you to make those decisions on your own. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me how you plan to build your Yoimiya. I'd love to hear from you. I'll see you in another video, so until then, stay tuned.